Hello everyone, my name is Jason Fausey. I'm the Technical Service Director at Nufarm, and today I wanted to spend a few minutes on weed control options that you have in cool season turf grass. Specifically, what I wanted to visit about today was SurePower herbicide. This is a relatively new herbicide that we've developed just over the last couple years, and really what I wanted to talk about was the fit and really how you might incorporate SurePower into a program looking at weed control uh, in cool season turf grass. Before developing any new herbicide, one of the questions I often like to ask people that use our products today are really what weeds are you struggling with or do you find most frustrating? A lot of times after you make a herbicide applications, a lot of times you'll find the same culprits, the ones that really stand out, ground ivy, yellow nutsedge, wild violet. You have to keep that in mind, especially if you're developing a new product that you really want to target some of the most frustrating weeds with. I'm going to start by just kind of outlining of really why did we develop a new product in SurePower. There are a number of post-emergence herbicides already on the marketplace that are used for various aspects. But with SurePower, we really wanted to design the herbicide that was the most active, especially on these difficult to control weeds. And overall, I think we've very successfully done that with SurePower. You'll see that it is a very active post-emergence herbicide that can be used to manage a lot of our more common weeds in cool season turf grass. Now, when you look at the makeup of SurePower, what we've done here is really taking our most active ingredients and putting them all in one product. So we have 2,4-D, fluoxapyr, triclopyr, and then added a fourth component, which is a brand new active ingredient for use in turf called flumioxazin. So what we've done here is taken two modes of action, put them together in an all new product really from the ground up. And the first thing you'll notice when you take a look at SurePower is it has a rather unique formulation. It's white in color. Unlike most of our other herbicides, this one is white in color, but one of the things about this formulation is that it does only have a caution signal word. So you'll find that that's very user friendly for a lot of people, is that it only does have a caution signal word on the package. I do also want to point out to people, though, it's not for use in a couple of counties in New York, which is very common, as well as it's not for use in the state of California. When you start breaking it down and looking at the turf grass species that you can apply SurePower to, it can be applied to Kentucky bluegrass, ryegrass, or fescue species, so tall fescue, fine fescue, any of the fescue species. I do want to point out, though, that this product should not be applied to creeping bentgrass. Actually, it does have activity on creeping bentgrass to the point where if it is starting to become a little bit of a weed or a little invasive, that if you make an application to bentgrass, that SurePower will certainly knock that particular grass back. When you take a look at SurePower, though, at the use rates, very common, 2 to 3.5 pints per acre for this post-emergence herbicide, with really the most common being at 3 pints per acre, which is equivalent to 1 fluid ounce per 1,000 square feet. And a lot of times you'll find that people with spot treatments in particular, and I'm going to show some pictures on this, may even use a little bit lower rate, down to 3/4 of an ounce per 1,000 square feet when they're applying SurePower in backpacks. Now, as far as the areas that you can treat or the turf grass, it's a very wide label here, anything from home lawns, park cemeteries, golf courses, sod farms. So a very wide label as far as the areas that you can treat with SurePower. Now, again, I mentioned very difficult to control weeds, and when I think of difficult to control weeds, these are some of them, like ground ivy, wild strawberry, Carolina geranium, stinging nettle, and thistles. Many of these are very deep-rooted perennials that most herbicides really struggle in controlling, especially with just a single application. Another one that we continue to hear about as far as a weed that's difficult to control are wild violets. I mean, there are several different species of wild violets, but especially with summer applications, it's hard to break through that real waxy thick cuticle that this plant develops in the summertime with a herbicide to get it into the leaf, through that leaf cuticle, and then get translocated down to the roots and have a long-term effect. Most herbicides really struggle with that, and this is one that SurePower really does tend to shine on. Fig buttercup, again, another perennial weed there that we're seeing kind of develop in a lot of areas, and just sort of like the picture indicates here, once this plant becomes established, it's very difficult to control and very rapidly spread through these small little bulbules. So again, another one where it's difficult to get the herbicides into the plant and then translocated down to that root structure to where some of these perennials can really tend to strive or take over areas if left untreated or using herbicides that just aren't very effective getting into the plant and having much of an effect. Just to kind of indicate what kind of response that you're going to get from an application of SurePower, here's just a picture of common chickweed on the day of the application. And here's a picture of some common chickweed, the exact same chickweed in this case, just one day after an application of SurePower. So you can see how that weed has already bleached out just a single day after the application. Whereas carrying that out to 3 days after the application, you can see a lot of necrosis on that chickweed. So that foliage that came in contact with SurePower, you can see how it's all bronzed. The turf looks great, no effect on the turf, but certainly the weeds by 3 days after the application are nearly fully controlled. And it's not only things like chickweed, but this is a picture from a summer application on spotted spurge. And you can see here on the left the area that was treated with spotted spurge. Not only the spurge, but there's some crabgrass in there that's bleached as well just one day after that application. So again, a very active post-emergence herbicide here with SurePower. Here's a picture looking at, again, some very deep-rooted perennials. Just a week after that application, you see the high level of activity that it provided on Canada thistle, milkweed, as well as prickly lettuce. So again, some difficult to control weeds that this herbicide can be very effectively used to help manage and control. So we've talked to this point about some grasses as well as broadleaf activity, but it has activity on sedges as well. Both of these pictures are taken of some pretty well-established yellow nutsedge plants just 7 days after that application. You can see how they're also very impacted and controlled, in this case, by a single application of SurePower. Again, here you can see the level of activity that SurePower provides on yellow nutsedge at 7 days after that application. But interestingly enough, and this was again with summer applications, well, it was over 90 degrees at the time of application, the level of activity that SurePower had on foxtail as well as nimblewill 7 days after the application. So this is very interesting and unique. Again, we're looking at annual grass and the foxtail, a perennial grass and the nimblewill, and again, a single application of SurePower having activity on those species as well as our yellow nutsedge. I've talked about wild violet a few different times, but here's just a picture of what you can expect at 3 days after that application with SurePower. Again, really tends to But it's also important to keep in mind with wild violet, again, I've talked about with the flumioxazin also adding to the other active ingredients that are in this herbicide is they're very well translocated and continue to see a level of control increase in time. So it's a very unique herbicide. You can see here what we're looking at is the percent control of wild violet. So a larger bar, the better level of activity it's providing, everywhere from starting at 4 days after, where we're looking at about 60%, going from 7 to 14, which is our yellow bar, 21 to 28 days after that application. So from the time of application to really a month after that application, the control went from 60% all the way up to over 90% control. So this is all with a 3 pint per acre application of SurePower, just a single application in the middle of the summer. So you can see, again, a lot of activity with this herbicide, not only initially, but that continues to increase even over time. I've talked about it, but the grass activity that SurePower provides also makes it unique. Here's a picture from one of our broadleaf trials, where in this trial we were looking at high overall densities of plantain, clover, and dandelion, that all three of those broadleaf weeds were very successfully controlled with the 4-Speed XT as well as the SurePower. But you take a look in the 4-Speed XT plots, you see some of that scraggly looking grass that's in there. That's some crabgrass. 4-Speed XT just doesn't have activity on crabgrass. Did a wonderful job on the broadleaf, but didn't control the crabgrass, whereas on the right, you can see in the SurePower plot, not only controlled all the broadleaves, but as well as some of these grasses. So you can kind of take advantage of that sometimes with SurePower, as that it controls sedges, grasses, as well as some broadleaf weeds, all in one herbicide. So in summary, to me, SurePower, this is not your old everyday broadleaf herbicide. Again, very broad spectrum. It's not a replacement for any of our herbicides that we already have out there, but to me, it's a brand new tool. It's a great tool to really go after these summer applications, difficult to control weeds with a single product. So I wanted to also share with you some of our observations from the field, and keep in mind, everything that I'm going to share with you are from applications that SurePower wasn't applied alone, and then also summer applications, which a lot of places will find our best window is really between June 15th and September 15th. Kind of those summer applications that we're talking about, that a lot of herbicides have difficulty controlling the weeds. That's when we see really SurePower having very strong activity. Here's a picture just to kind of show that from a research plot at Purdue University. This is on the field day that they had this summer on July 9th. So you can see a plot here just full of weeds. And here's a plot just 7 days after that application with SurePower. Again, at our 3 pint per acre rate, you can see pretty much all the broadleaf weeds that were in this particular trial were controlled with just a single application in 7 days. Not only some common broadleaf weeds, but again, some of the most difficult ones that people talk about, something like doveweed. This is with just 3/4 of an ounce per 1,000 square feet of SurePower, and you can see that strong activity on the doveweed that this single application was making. Not only doveweed, but Virginia buttonweed. This is the one I probably get the most feedback on, especially in our tall fescue lawns. Very difficult to control weed. Especially in the summer when it really starts to thrive and take off. That here you can see the level of activity that SurePower is providing just from, again, a single application, in this case at 1 ounce per 1,000 square feet. This was another picture that we got back from one of our field trials where the report back was, this product is devastating. You can see below the line where the SurePower was applied to the spurge and above where the spurge was untreated. You could just simply draw the line right to where this herbicide is applied. Again, very active on a lot of broadleaf weeds with our summer applications. So you might be asking yourself, okay, this thing works quickly, but how about effectively, long-term control? And this was some pictures that we've taken from the University of Wisconsin. But what we're looking at over on the left is an area that was really just kind of covered, inundated with ground ivy. So they made an application with SurePower on August 28th, and the picture on the left is 3 days after that, where you can see a lot of brown in there. The ground ivy's already pretty much disappeared. The next picture in the middle was 10 days after that initial application, and you could really just draw out the blocks without even doing it on the slide of where the SurePower was applied. And what was really, really interesting, when we went back there in July this year at the University of Wisconsin, you could still see these blocks where SurePower was applied nearly a year after that single application. So yes, it's very effective quickly, but also provides strong long-term control as well. One thing I do want to mention is, and talk about briefly here, is the turf tolerance with SurePower. And you'll probably notice if you're looking at this driveway on the right, the turf looks a little bit greener than the turf on the left. I will say that everything that we're looking at was applied, SurePower was applied to all this turf, but over on the right, it was applied one day versus on the left where you see a little off color, SurePower was applied the next day. So it was just a couple hours difference between the right and the left, but you can see some differences in the level of response to the turf. We know for a fact that this doesn't happen very often, but certainly there are some cases that we've seen this. It's very transient. It will outgrow this very quickly with a mowing. Typically it's gone completely after that. In this case, the applicator was making applications with ride-on equipment. And you can see he began these applications actually on April 3rd in Troy, Michigan, so relatively cool conditions. He applied SurePower, or had been applying for nearly 3 weeks without having any effect, and then all of a sudden he made an application on April 22nd, And you can see the picture on the left where he really had some bronzing in his turf on that day. At that point in time, the turf growth was really starting to take off to where it was very rapidly growing. You got a lot of herbicide uptake on this day of application, and you could see some bronzing. But the nice thing, like I said, it is transient. Even by a week after that application, it was hard to even detect that any SurePower had been applied to this turf. And we know some tips really to avoid this response. For one, I've mentioned this before, but it's very important that when you're using SurePower, you do not put anything with it. No surfactants, no fertilizer. Don't add another pesticide to it. Just apply SurePower by itself, and you can still obtain very good uptake and very good control, especially with these summer applications with SurePower by itself. And I also tell people and warn people that if it's a time of year and your cool season grass is growing so quickly where you probably even have to mow like twice a week just to try to keep up with it, that's not the time to apply SurePower. At that point in time, the turf is too thin, the cuticle thickness, right, protects that turf. The turf is growing so quickly that the cuticle is very, very thin, so we get a lot of herbicide uptake and it can lead to some spotting and speckling. Now, the nice thing is that the turf is growing quickly, that it'll outgrow it. You can mow it off, but really to me, the best way to avoid it is just not to make these applications when turf is really actively growing and quickly growing. Similar fashion, if turf is very wet or dewy in the morning, again, that herbicide can really sit on those leaves for a long period of time in that wet water solution. You get more and more herbicide uptake, and it can lead to this spotting and speckling effect as well. So it is important that you avoid those, as well as getting the timing right. Again, summer applications is really ideal for SurePower. So with SurePower, I will say it's hands down the fastest and most active, broadest spectrum post-emergence herbicide on the market today. This continues to be displayed within our research trials, and when people actually have an opportunity to apply SurePower for the first time, they'll notice the speed and effectiveness of this herbicide. I tell people time and time again, this is not a replacement for any other 3- or 4-way herbicide on the market. This is an unusual post-emergence herbicide that, again, is a great tool, especially for summer applications when weeds are more difficult to control. Our turf is kind of hardened off at that point in time, and a lot of times we find it's very difficult for herbicides to get into these really waxy cuticle leaves of some of our weeds and obtain very satisfactory control. But SurePower is one that can still do that for folks. Now, when we take a look at it, and how could SurePower be pulled into a program and really best utilized? As I've mentioned, we have a lot of different tools and herbicides that we can take advantage of at Nufarm, and really how I see an overall program being used, or how people could pull out individual products and use them in the correct season, might look like something like this, to where it's great to start the season with a product like 4-Speed XT. This herbicide has a lot of flexibility. It can be mixed with various fertilizers and really go after some difficult to control weeds in the spring. But then once things start to slow down as far as the turf growth, I've talked about it, this makes a good time to move into a product like SurePower to really target some of the most difficult to control weeds that would be out there, especially in the summer. We've also seen some advantages when Q-Ball, which is our post-emergence crabgrass material, is used in combination with SurePower around the same time. They certainly can work well together. So again, some flexibility during summer applications that include SurePower, then to finish the season with a product like Escalade 2, where you're switching up your chemistry some, and you can really have some good activity and finish off the year strong with a herbicide when we know this makes a great time to try to control our perennial weeds, right? They're still translocating down to that root, so you make an application in the fall with something like Escalade 2 and really obtain very strong weed control. Another tool that we have is Solero. I've mentioned that SurePower has strong activity on yellow nutsedge, but Solero is a very broad spectrum sedge material. It can be used not only against sedges, but also Kalinga species. So certainly if you're having any sedge problems really throughout the summer, Solero would be a tool that you could also incorporate into a program. So again, many different herbicides that we have within our portfolio here at Nufarm to really help out and guide you throughout the way. And I just want to finish the day by saying thank you for listening to our webinar today. I wanted to let everybody know, certainly if you have any questions at any point in time, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have on our products. And again, thank you for participating, and look forward to talking to you in the future.